All right, good evening, Internet, and welcome to Kenter at Your Own Risk, episode 54, where Kent, Kevin, and Chris will be talking about the difference between horror and thriller, and if there even is one. Before we get into that, it's been a pretty good month for me. I think it's been a pretty good month for Kent, and hopefully it has been for Kevin, since this is the third time we're starting this podcast. But go ahead. Say hello to the internet, guys.
Hey guys, I'm doing pretty good so far.
I think I'm going to take a shot every time we have to restart the podcast.
You're going to be pretty drunk then.
Yeah.
So, anyways, when we were setting our schedule up for the rest of the year, earlier in the year, I think we were missing the last couple of months, and we had through October scheduled. So we knew that we were going to be hitting up the Hannibal series and then horror icons. And while some of us were in the process of watching Hannibal and we were talking about the horror icons, I remember Kent saying something about reading a top horror list while he was looking through the stuff, and people were discussing what was horror and what wasn't, and he revised at least some of his thinking on what constituted horror, which made it interesting because I remember him saying that Silence of the Lambs wasn't a horror movie, but Hannibal Lecter was a horror icon because Silence of the Lambs was a thriller movie. And then I wanted to be like, well, what constitutes horror versus thriller? And thus came up with the idea of this podcast. Also, hopefully, it'll be a little shorter than our last couple ones, so you won't have to spend so long listening to our dulcet tones. So I guess probably where we should start is, what do you guys think constitutes horror as a genre versus what constitutes thriller as a genre? Kevin, do you want to start?
Yeah,
out?
I'll go first because this is pretty quick. So horror, it's really hard because it's so subjective, and I think the way I kind of like skate by in these like pickings of movies when we do like certain categories is that it's so subjective and it's so kind of open, and a lot of the movies that I wouldn't necessarily consider horror films or think to be like, oh, this is a good horror film or whatever the A and B is before the horror. Like I would say, Killing of a Sacred Deer is kind of a horror. It's kind of like in this realm of, I don't really know what I would call it. It is a thriller. It does have supernatural kind of aspects, which doesn't always make something a horror. But so anyways, this is it's really hard for me to actually like come up with a decision or a definitive answer for horror. But what I looked up and what I can kind of make is that feeling that you get when you see a horror film, and it can be the difference in like which we'll get into the editing or the way the genre, like the editing style of the genre. Um, but it has to like elicit some sort of fear, and not to like any time that there's something scary makes it a horror film, but like when there is something that is disgust or paranoid or just like fearful, like that I feel, that kind of constitutes horror. But then we can kind of get into like, the Friday the 13th sequels that really aren't really scary anymore. But a thriller always seemed to have sort of the same thing, but like a thriller aspect to it, or a mystery aspect to it. But at the same time, horror can kind of have that same thing. So, uh,
Would you also say like suspense with
yes.
thriller?
Oh, well, yeah, and also like I think mystery suspense is kind of like an equivalent to that, right? You know, to some degree.
Yeah, like the lines are really blurry,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And some horror films are like, most of them have like a mystery. Is this real? Is this, and I think in more recent films, or like even House on Haunted Hill, the original, is that a horror film, even though the kind of ending it's more of a mystery and with an answer to it that isn't really, not to ruin the movie for people, but it's not really what you think is going on. Fair to say. We've all seen that movie, right?
Yeah, one of the best of its
Sure.
time.
Yep.
And we agree it's a horror film.
What?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Uh, and I think a definite part of this whole thing has to be when the time frame of when it came out, because what was horror in the 30s is different than what was horror, say, in the 50s or 60s, which is different than what was horror 80. Like the standards kind of shift slightly in some ways. Would you not agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Like Godzilla is like a monster movie, and when it came out, it was considered like a sci-fi horror film because, it's a monster destroying buildings and but now not even with the way that the more modern Godzilla movies are framed are more like sci-fi action than a horror aspect, even though it's still, or even the Jurassic Park or uh Jurassic Park or the Lost World have those same themes, but I don't know, when you think about it, you're like, yeah, I guess it kind of is a horror film, but and then I can throw Jaws in the mix into that too, but I don't know. I wouldn't imagine going to a horror section to see Jaws. I don't know. I really wish I asked my dad if where some of these movies were found in Mr. Video in Mayfield, New York. Was it?
Jaws was typically in horror.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember it being in horror.
Yep, Jaws 1
Okay.
through 4.
What about you, Kent? I mean, what is like? I think a lot of what I have is going to be rebuttals, so I want to get what you feel in place first.
Kevin was either saying it or at the very least, alluding to there's like a certain vibe to it. And it is really, really tough. Like, I came in wanting to have like a definitive like perspective of what is horror and what isn't. But let's face it, there's blank adjacent everything now, and I guess we're going to talk about at least a handful of movies that we can kind of debate one way or the other, and I think it's. I mean, this is possibly the most subjective podcast we're ever going to have because two of us may think one way, the other one will think the other way, and it's just the vibes you get. It's the time the movie came out. It's not so much like there's a movie. You can have a movie where the quote unquote killer kills 5 people, and you could make that into an action movie, a thriller movie, a drama movie, or a horror movie. Like you could come up with examples for all those genres, and it all kind of comes down to like motivation, how the movie's portrayed, the music, the vibe, the setting, the story. Like, there's so much context into this that there's just no such blanket definition that's going to come in handy for this. So, you know, Hannibal, which I know we're going to delve a little deeper into, like, yeah, of course, there's vibes of various genres, and I think it just kind of comes down to uh, what's most predominant to us. Like, whatever's the most predominant vibe we get is usually how we classify or define, like, the movie's primary adjective or description, genre, whatever the fuck you want to go with. Jaws, like Kevin mentioned, some people are just like, well, it's kind of an action movie, or, you can go action, you can go drama, you can go thriller, you can go fucking horror. Like, okay, so you got 4 fucking possibilities. Like, and, you can make arguments for any of this. I could make an argument that fucking Denzel Washington and Man on Fire killed more people than fucking Henry in the movie Henry. Portrait of a Serial Killer, I think it was. So
Yep.
I don't know. Like Rambo has a higher kill count than fucking Freddy Krueger
Have you
does.
seen the Last Blood?
Yeah, that one was
Dude,
fucking
it
pretty bloody.
basically turns into a slasher film because it's with a knife. You know, like at the end, it's basically like a slasher Home Alone kind of thing. Even though the first Rambo had those like building the booby traps and stuff in the woods, it felt like a slasher movie to me. And I read reviews that kind of said the same thing, which kind of I don't know. The, uh, that one definitely had a very almost slasher feel to it than the previous Rambo movies.
I feel like you could almost say that slasher doesn't have to be
No,
horror anymore.
but it is kind of it's all. I mean, I guess we'll get into like the context of it all. And I feel in some movies that it's sort of like a disservice to say Silence of the Lambs is a horror movie because you know, it's a like procedural, but if we're going from like either drama, thriller, horror, I don't know, crime really wasn't. It's like a subgenre, right?
Yeah, because crime is like in half the
Yeah,
movies. You know what I mean?
yeah. It's like a specific genre, like a crime action film or something. So you know, and there is some crime horror films and stuff like that too, which think we might be a uh good topic sometime. But uh,
Yeah.
go ahead.
S-
Okay, so
Go ahead. Go ahead, Kevin.
but Silence of the Lambs, right? So I guess what would be the primary genres of Silence of the Lambs? Is it thriller first? Mystery? Is there mystery to it?
I feel it's. If you're asking me to not look at IMDb or anything else, and you just say what's the first genre that comes to mind, I think I go with thriller.
Well, I'm looking at IMDb, and they say crime, drama, and thriller.
Okay.
There is a lot of
I
drama.
also think though, once again we just yeah, like there's a ton of drama. Silence of the Lambs kind of covers a ton of genres, quite frankly. I mean, there's a lot of movies that do, but that one in particular really does cover this wide swath of genres, which makes it a trickier film than
Yeah,
Nightmare on Elm
absolutely.
Street. You know,
And
it. Would you? All right, I guess I'll ask this. If I say just name a horror movie, are you going to pick a movie that you might consider horror to be like the third or fourth predominant genre? Like, I don't know. At that point, it's kind of weird to call it necessarily a
yeah,
horror movie.
I agree. There's aspects to it. Like of Silence of the Lambs. There is a horror aspect that I feel touches the crime, drama, and thriller, and it's kind of the underlining cannibalism because really no one gets eaten in the movie, as I remember. I mean, Hannibal kind of like bites that, or no, he kind of cuts the dude's face off and wears it. But we don't see that. That's kind of like a reveal, and that part is almost like more shocking than if you saw it. And
Yeah,
if
it's the. I mean, one of the things that people have known forever since we started telling scary stories to each other is the imagination is always scarier than anything you can see on screen or in real life. You know, you can always go further than what they can show, which is why I think gore doesn't always necessitate itself going into a scary movie. Well, it might still be a horror. Anyways, to kind of rein us back in, you know, I wanted to kind of identify this for myself too, but I was like, you know what? Let me see what some people online are saying. You know, to see if I can find somebody who helps me like quantify my opinions. And I saw all sorts of shit looking up horror versus thriller. One of the most articulate ones I saw, but I don't necessarily think I agreed with very much, was they said one of the biggest differences between horror and thriller is perspective. And they didn't give a ton of examples, but one of the things that they proposed was that in most horror movies, we are in the perspective of the victims. And in thrillers, we often get an outside perspective so we can see what's going on with whoever the villain is as well, which tends to build up more tension. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that because I can think of examples of both off the top of my head where neither of that applies. But I think part of that, in that thriller relies on tension, is definitely something that I think can almost universally be said about thriller as a category of movies. Another thing I saw was that, and this I think is probably a big portion of it, is that while thrillers can be violent, horror movies are typically more violent than thrillers are. Like, as you just mentioned, Kevin, in Silence of the Lambs, even though Hannibal Lecter's a cannibal, he doesn't actually eat anybody in the movie. And even when he kills the police officers at the end and skins one of the guy's faces and wears it, we never see that. Even when he's beating the guy with the billy club, we see him swinging it, but we don't see the actual effects of the club striking the police officer. Same thing with Buffalo Bill. We don't actually see him skinning any of the women. We just see him prancing around in the skin suit, dancing around.
Beautifully, I might add.
So I do think that there is an element of horror will typically show more of the violence than a thriller will. But I think a big portion of it comes down to the type of fear that a movie is trying to elicit within us. I saw one article today where they were talking about 7 different types of fear, talking everything from concern all the way up to panic. But the 3 that I mainly see when discussing like these type of stories, whether it's in movies, books, shows, what have you, is people talking about dread, horror, and terror. Obviously, if we apply horror to horror, which would seem to be a 1-to-1 correlation, horror is, in this one description, the feeling of revulsion that usually follows a frightening sight, sound, or otherwise experience. So, something that scares us that we see, hear, or otherwise experience. And I think dread is the type of fear that more applies to thrillers overall, where it's terror or apprehension about something in the future. And I think because, as obviously art is subjective, fear is subjective, movies can be subjective, although there are objective things about them. I think this is why there's so much crossover, because something that I find frightening might not be frightening to you, Kevin, or to you, Kent, and vice versa. Or something that the 3 of us watch might not be frightening at all, and then, something our parents saw, it scares the shit out of them. And like...
Or kids, even.
Oh yeah, or kids. Like you guys were saying, horror changes. Us watching, Bela Lugosi do a fucking crazy-ass faux Eastern European accent and say, I never drink wine, is amusing to us, versus, seeing him transform into that bat in 1931 was probably scary as shit to some fucking people. Like you just said, like Jaws. I mean, you would qualify it more as like an action movie or a drama, but, those people who saw it in, what was it, 1977? Saw the severed head roll out of that boat? There were people who fucking fainted in the theater when they saw that for the first time.
They got affected people's lives.
Yeah.
And that is, yes. And by all definition, that is.
So, I mean,
that it is a horror that that film evoked into people.
So, I mean, obviously, horror and fear change over time. I mean, a good portion of that is the desaturation that we see with being exposed to just so much media and violence and what have you. That, yeah, I mean, the more you see, the more denatured you get to being bothered by violence. I remember when I was a kid. I don't remember what year it first came out, but the movie Cyborg with Jean-Claude Van Damme. The scene where the bad guys are having the little girl, they wrap up the family in the barbed wire, and they tell her that if she can hold the family up by holding onto the barbed wire, they'll let him live. And she's a fucking like a 6-year-old. How the hell is she going to hold up like 800 pounds of people? That really bothered me as a kid. Like, I had to stop watching the movie the first time I watched that. Now, I watch it, it doesn't even faze me. So, I mean, just within my own personal experience, I've seen the desensitization towards violence, being over in Iraq probably was a big portion of what helped with that. But yeah, so I mean, I think it's definitely like Thriller relies more on tension and probably does give a greater overall experience of what's happening throughout the whole thing. And typically, horror will have a bit more violence. And, the whole potential of supernatural or fantastical elements that a thriller typically won't have. I mean, I think that's probably the biggest, like, criteria of where I come from in regards to how I would, straight up, this is a thriller versus this is a horror. But then, I begin to question things like, if you look at, like, the original Halloween, it's classified as like a horror classic, but the kill count is relatively low. By today's standards, the violence is relatively low. So, I mean, what makes, at that time, just a presumably normal human in a mask killing people with a knife, a weapon, what have you, a horror movie versus I don't know, some other
Well,
things that are going on.
I mean, the fact that it's called, I think, Halloween I mean, I think it like that movie shaped what we define as horror, like, and also part of it is like why I had a
Yeah.
hard time, probably until this conversation now, of like associating Jaws as a horror film was because of the movie Halloween is associated with Halloween. So there's like this Halloween horror aspect to it. So when we did the horror icons, I was thinking, and we were doing it in October, it was really hard to break out of, you know, other things. And, I probably would have forgot about Hannibal Lecter if we didn't do that, very easily. I mean, I forgot about Pennywise, and very much, absolutely a major horror icon, like,
Yeah.
and Ash. Yeah. And I
And
was
Ash.
not used to being good guys, uh, the heroes of horror. I wasn't thinking of that.
I mean, if we really think about it, how many good guys
Yeah, no,
are
there's a
horror
couple.
icons? So, I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think there are a ton. Yeah. But there are a couple. Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I mean, it's just an interesting debate. One, I don't think there really is an answer to. I don't, like, I guess my end opinion overall would be if it's close enough that we have to argue semantics over whether or not it's horror or thriller, it probably could count as both or neither, depending upon the kind of list or thing we're making. Which I guess is the unequivocal stance that the internet wanted us to come down with. But like Ken has mentioned, I mean, the word adjacent has been tossed out so often next to different genres, lists, what have you. We've used it a ton. So I mean, I guess an interesting question, and I don't know how you would find the answer, would be like, when did people start asking questions to try to separate these genres. Yeah, because I remember for a while when I was a kid, horror wasn't really called horror. They were just like, you want to watch a scary movie? You know, like, shit, even Scream. What's your favorite scary movie? You know, so if something was scary, didn't matter if it was, you know, excuse me, Halloween, House on Haunted Hill, Threads, you know, whatever it was that bothered you. Like, shit, I bet Godzilla was a completely different experience watching it in Japan in the 50s versus, you know, as a kid in America in the 80s.
Yeah, even location of where you were. I mean, obviously affected Japan more than it affected us, right? Like, so even your location can make a difference in how you view it, I would say.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Oh yeah.
And what about, like, Garfield's Halloween special? There's fucking ghost pirates in that, and as a kid, I was like, this is horror. As an adult, obviously it's just a fun little cartoon, but
Oh, there was a little bit of scary shit in there.
sure. And, that's all just, it's all, like, perspective. Hell, Silence of the Lambs has, arguably, I'll say arguably, two horror icons, right? Like, you could say that Buffalo Bill and Hannibal Lecter are horror icons, and you could also argue, like, it's not a horror movie. And it's like, well, what the fuck? That's a weird, that's a complicated fucking mouthful of to say, really, because I don't know. If you just look at those two characters on their own accord, you instantly would probably say, yeah, they seem like horror characters.
They're scary.
Yeah.
For sure. Both of them are very scary. And especially more so with Hannibal Lecter because he has that, highbrow, vulgar.
But what if he danced, Kevin?
I mean, I'd pay to see that.
So would I.
Anytime. Anthony Hopkins wants to put on that mask and do some dance moves in the stretcher.
Take my money right now, please.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Give him one more gold statue. So one of the movies that what I was thinking of was have you guys seen Annihilation?
Yeah, the who was it?
Alex Garland
Yes.
movie
Yeah.
with Natalie Portman. Can't have you?
No, it's been on my to-do list. I think I bought it recently. But
It's-
go ahead. I kind of know enough about it, so you're not spoiling anything.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna I'm not gonna go like deep dive on it, but so I watched that the other night because like Alex Garland, his movies kind of like Men is also it's a horror film, and this is reminding me of my original thought, but so like Men has a body horror element to it, and Ex Machina has more of a sci-fi thriller feel to it, but Annihilation. I saw it the first time. I didn't really remember it. I watched it again, and because I didn't really feel like also I would be like, this is a horror film. But it actually
Do we
like
want to pause
scared me.
here?
Why?
Oh, okay. Because I just lost you guys for a second.
Oh, okay. Do we want to? Since we already did that.
All right. I'm just going to note the time and fuck.
It was about 28:45.
Yeah. All right. Kevin, just start again with Annihilation. I'm just going to note it around 28 minutes. So just start with Annihilation again.
So, Annihilation by Alex Garland. I saw it the first time. It didn't really feel like a horror film, but I really didn't remember much about it. And then I watched it the other night, and still in the beginning, it didn't feel, I'm like, okay, this is definitely more like science fiction thriller with horror aspects to it. But then there was this scene that actually like terrified me. It's the three girls in the chair. Chris, you remember the scene?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, that scene like really screwed me up. Plus, but it's like the context that surrounds it when they're in this like other alternative zone. I don't, the shimmer. There was so many elements to it, and by the end of it, I'm like, this is absolutely a horror film. Uh, and I think the more so than Alex Garland's other movies, Men is definitely a horror film, but basically only because it's that. I mean, I only saw that once in the theater, and uh, it's got this giant uh, body horror scene. Have you guys seen Men?
I haven't seen Men yet. No.
I'm really slacking on that
Okay,
one,
it
but it's on
it's
my
great.
list.
It's like a slow drama movie that like you know almost kind of has this David Cronenberg feel to it. Where I kind of want to switch to that too is because a scene or because of like Dead Ringers. You guys have you guys seen David Cronenberg's Dead
Yep.
Ringers?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So, like that movie's listed as horror and it doesn't really feel like a horror film, but it definitely has these body horror aspects of, the twins and the conjoined twins and even a lot of it seems more like dream sequence as I remember. Would that be something that you consider horror because it has body horror to it? Like that's, I guess, our only terminology for that kind of stuff with prosthetics, and you know the the whole gun.
I don't know. Cronenberg's shit is usually fucked up, no matter. I guess except for what was it, the real story? Was that the one about the where he did the guy driving the tractor to go visit his family? But just about everything else he's done I've seen is, if not horror adjacent.
Well, like yeah.
That would make sense.
Well, not all of it. I mean, I don't think History of Violence or Eastern Promises are.
Okay,
But yeah, he's got some other things too. Yeah, but the beginning stuff like Videodrome, yeah, it's very horror adjacent. Scanners, horror. I think Scanners is kind of a horror. It's the definition of body horror.
Yeah, I mean, blowing up people's minds or heads. Yeah.
Getting back into the graphic nature of it. His new film, Crimes of the Future, and we can put that on the list later on and we can discuss it, but it's a sci-fi horror, but really it's just a lot of body horror and this other kind of, I mean, there's elements to it, but I feel like a lot of ways it's like a disservice to say that. Like you could say David Cronenberg's The Fly is a horror movie because it kind of fills all of the check marks.
The Fly has a distinct
Yes.
sci-fi horror feel. Like, and I guess that's one of the most difficult things to quantify is the actual just feeling of the movie. You can separate like everything else, but if it has like a certain mood or a certain feeling, like it kind of sets the stage for you to be like, all right, maybe this is going to be horror. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be. Batman movies can actually feel kind of it's dark and all this stuff. Like The Crow. I was thinking about The Crow today. I was like, like there's a lot of elements that feel very horror-ish if you think about it.
He dies and comes back to life to kill everybody.
Yeah, like I don't know. That's at the very least horror adjacent. I just don't consider it a horror movie, but
Yeah,
it's definitely adjacent.
Oh, for sure. The sister, the incestuous sister, cutting out the dude's eyes. Yeah, I mean, yeah. There are definitely some. Tony Todd. I mean, I fucking forgot he was in it. Sporting his cool ass goatee. But
That's
I don't
right.
remember Tony Todd, and man, he's just in everything, isn't he?
he was Michael Wincott's lieutenant who shoots the crow at the end.
Yeah.
And it also has was it David Patrick Kelly, the guy from the Warriors?
Twin Peaks.
Warriors come out. Yeah, like that. Actually, The Crow is a pretty loaded fucking cast.
Oh yeah. And Ernie Hudson.
Like
Dude, that was one of the first things I saw Ernie Hudson in. I was like, because I remember, I remember seeing him in Congo, and I was like, yeah, Ghostbusters was obviously the first thing I saw him in. But I remember seeing him in Congo. I'm like, wow, he's really hamming it up. I'm like, I don't. I mean, he's good, but I don't know like what he's trying to do in that. But then I saw him in The Crow, and I'm like, wow, okay, yeah, that obviously must have been a choice in Congo because he was fucking really good in this, you know, and he could play a little bit more subtle.
Yes, and Basketball Diaries also. Not to go down the rift of Ernie Hudson, but that was a good performance from him where it wasn't super.
I don't. I mean, I think I saw that after I saw The Crow.
Yeah.
I mean, I did see it. One of the most depressing days I ever had. I watched Basketball Diaries and then Leaving Las Vegas back to back, and I was like, "Oh my god, there's no meaning to life."
Start drinking now. Start drinking and filling up that shopping cart at the liquor store.
That's a day of harsh.
You know, another one
right
that you mentioned, you reminded me of, Kent, was the Transformers movies. Actually, the Michael Bay ones in the beginning. They have a very, like, I wouldn't say that they're horror films, but I would tell people who like horror, like, oh, you know, there's kind of like a vibe to them with the tentacles and like the fluids pouring out all over the place. They're kind of like horror gags, but with robot.
You sold me on tentacles and fluids.
And, yeah. I guess Megan Fox was sort of a final girl. Or, maybe, you know, they shared duties.
She was definitely a final hindrance.
Yeah.
All right. I'll ask a movie.
Go ahead.
Because I just watched this for the very first time this week. This weekend I watched 6 movies in preparation of this. So, King Kong, which was, I don't know, 1933. We gotta mute our mics when we're making noises and shit. So, King Kong, I don't know. I came into it expecting an adventure movie, and it most certainly was an adventure movie. But, I mean, for its time, I can clearly see where you could make the argument for it to be horror. And I guess first and foremost, have you guys ever seen the original King Kong?
I remember watching it back in the 80s, but I haven't seen it since then.
I mean, it's cheap.
I've seen it in parts.
But, I mean, I'm guessing Kevin
but
has
I don't.
as well.
Yeah, the 1933 one. It's been a long time.
Yeah, I've seen parts of the one with Naomi Watts and Jack Black. I've never seen the Jessica Lange. Was it Jeff Bridges?
Jeff Bridges and Jessica Lange. Yeah, that one I watched. I remember watching that a couple times when I was growing up because it was like one of those things that was on HBO. You know, when we had HBO as like the only cool channel to watch. And I do remember watching King Kong Lives when it came out because I think my mom had just started working at Video World at the time.
Like, all right, is it scarier? Is King Kong, the character itself, scarier nowadays with all the special effects that we have trying to make it dark and scary? Or is it actually scarier to see, like, I don't know what the... was it claymation? It wasn't... I don't know what the fuck effects they used back in 33 to make King Kong, but, like, that's fucking freaky to look at with you know, 2023 eyes. I don't know. Like, what's actually the scarier version of it?
I think probably for me the 2005 Naomi Watts one. Just because it was directed by Peter Jackson and you can see some of, you know, like his early horror coming through. I don't know if you've ever seen this scene where they're getting attacked by like the insects and the worms and shit.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that felt horrific to me, especially because of how little I like insects. But I mean, I would agree with somebody who said none of these are horror movies, and I think part of that is because a lot of people take it out of context. But King Kong is really almost the victim of the movies. When you look at everything that's occurring versus
Yeah.
being a villain. I mean,
It's like
yeah,
Frankenstein.
exactly. I've seen people compare King Kong to Frankenstein. I don't know if the comparison is necessarily apt because in one, the victim is still created because of man's hubris, and in another one, he's just kidnapped to be entertainment. But yeah, I mean, I could definitely see the. I think probably part of the hardest reason to figure this out is because we're so far removed from the original release. This 90 years,
Yeah.
things have just changed. Like you said, seeing the stop motion animation that they used to make him is creepy. But I mean, imagine what that looked like, 90 years ago to see that.
It might have been like
Yeah, I'm sure it blew like our grandparents or great grandparents' fucking mind.
awe-inspiring, like like an
Holy
awe.
shit! It's a giant gorilla.
How did they do that? In a way, but we're still like, hey, how did they do that? And I like, I consider it movie magic. The original King Kong is kind of freaky. I don't know if it is just like an awkwardness, and there is something far removed. The Peter Jackson one, there is aspects of it, but it really doesn't feel like the insects thing. But like, it kind of gets negated when King Kong has Naomi Watts in his hands for like an hour and a half, and he's just doing all this stuff and like punching all these things,
Yeah,
and she's like fine, like she's screaming, but she's
I'm not.
fine.
I'm not saying it's a good movie, but like that one scene, I think sticks out.
Yeah, I do think it's
Yeah.
a good movie, but it's it could lose like an hour of the dinosaurs.
I would even say in the original King Kong, possibly the scariest scene is when they're creeping up on the tribe as they're doing their ritual, and like then they all kind of look over. Because I know recently we talked a little bit about cults, and like I got the same kind of vibe, or like I don't know, throughout Resident Evil 4 video game, like all of a sudden like these people are doing some shit, and they notice like some outsiders are watching them do some shit, and then it's like, whoa, what's going to happen? And it has kind of a good creepy, suspenseful vibe to it. I don't know. I kind of actually really enjoyed that aspect more than just about anything else in King Kong. And I would also say King Kong really, the original. Maybe it's because I already knew like what was going on, but like the last half hour was begrudgingly slow. I fixed that by immediately watching Simpsons Treehouse of Terror, the fourth one with King Homer, and I got many laughs because Smithers said that women and semen do not mix. Always a classic.
Oh, Smithers.
But all in all, I think I would say King Kong. I'm going to classify King Kong as a horror just because if I try to put myself back in 1933, I think that's scary. I think.
It's a monster movie.
Yeah. And I guess, because, you brought up Godzilla, and I watched that this morning. I hadn't seen that since, like, the 90s. And it's the same, I guess it's, like, along the same lines as, yeah, as you're watching it, like, I don't know, he's breathing, I wasn't sure if he's breathing frost or fire, whatever the hell was going on. But, there was a high body count, lots of destruction. Yeah, I can see where that's horror, but nowadays it's like, oh, look at his back scales, like they're just flopping around, ha ha ha. At the time, though, yeah, I get that should be, it has to be horror, even though it's dated. Like, it's dated horror.
I mean, can we all agree that the scariest Godzilla movie was the one with Matthew Broderick and Jean Reno?
Wait,
It had a great soundtrack, though.
I did not like that movie when it came out. It was too close to Jurassic Park, like elements. But I've come to enjoy Roland Emmerich, and it's it's okay. I kind of, are you being serious, Chris? That it is the scariest?
I mean,
Or just because it's
watching it
awful?
fills me with horror.
Yeah. Was
I
Tia
loved
Leone?
Godzilla as a kid. You know, I watched as many of them as I could. You know, when they would be on like TV on like a Saturday afternoon, and so I was huge, hugely excited to see Godzilla when it came out. You know, I loved Matthew Broderick. Yeah, as you said back then, I was a huge Roland Emmerich fan. I had watched, you know, just about everything he'd done in the '90s, and then that came out, and we got whatever that was. You know, like I love the fucking robot chicken skit where they're like, you know, why does it seem like something was cut with them from the movie? And they show that there was the whole Raptors on Ice portion of
Yep.
It's a good monster movie with a bad title. Like if they just named it anything but Godzilla, you know, people would
I
be like,
mean,
"Oh, it's a
yeah.
Godzilla knockoff, whatever." But I think it would still be better
I think the
received.
biggest problem I had with it, you know, from like a creative standpoint, is it was a Godzilla movie, and then 90% of what we got were like Godzilla's children who looked just like raptors chasing people around, like you said, right after Jurassic Park came out. Maybe. I mean, shit, was it after The Lost World, or was it before?
I think it was after Lost World, because yeah,
98.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
because that was 2000, right? Godzilla.
It was Godzilla was
Godzilla's
98, Lost World was 97. So yeah, I mean, I was disappointed by The Lost World, and then I was disappointed by Godzilla. It was just a disappointing 2 years for giant lizard movies.
Because the Lost World
So,
ripped off Godzilla with the whole ending, but it's like San Diego instead of Tokyo or wherever.
Yep, yep.
I'll ask this. Even if somebody doesn't consider Godzilla to be a horror movie, would you. I feel like Cloverfield is mandatory horror. Like, I can't think of any other genre that would be the most predominant title. And yet, you know, there's a lot of similarities, right?
Oh yeah, I mean,
But it's the tone and how it's shot and
people
the whole
thought
vibe.
Cloverfield was a Godzilla movie before it actually came out because you remember how close to their chest they hid the
Yeah,
monster's appearance in all of the trailers and everything.
yeah.
Yeah.
It definitely that feels like a definitive horror. I don't feel like there's much leeway in saying that Cloverfield is anything but a horror. I guess is my point. Whereas Godzilla, I understand where somebody be like, nah, whatever. But yeah, it's kind of I don't want to say it's the same movie. It's not the same movie, but it tackles the same premise in a lot of ways.
In a different perspective, which is the handheld camera on the streets, rather than, you know, you get a little bit of that in Godzilla, but you know, not handheld, but you know, they get a little bit of the street stuff, right? But it's more of
Yeah.
like an overview of what's going on. Um, yeah, I feel like that's kind of like with editing, filmmaking, but yeah, I would say, you know, Godzilla, King Kong. Would I be like, oh, you should, you know, someone like, oh, you should watch this King Kong movie. It's a good horror film, you know, early horror, maybe with King Kong, but you know, you guys see Godzilla just because you got to see it. Um, I don't know. Does that make sense? Did I even come up with a point?
Yeah, I think it makes more sense when you think of Godzilla as a horror movie when you think back to the 1950s when the original was created, and it was an allegory for the atomic bomb being dropped on Japan. But yeah, I mean, even after that, though, you know, when Toei Studios saw the success that they had on their hands and what they could make, I mean, it eventually became, you know, like an early version of 1980s Mattel and Hasbro making cartoons. You know, you'd end up with toys based on Godzilla, you know, Gigan, Rodan, Jet Jaguar. You know, they would do crossovers with Gamera from Korea and Ultraman, you know, the anime. And then I remember them being like a cartoon series in the 80s, you know, kind of like King of All Monsters, where Godzilla and the other monsters would fight. you could see how it lended itself into other shit. And then I think it's kind of evolved into Godzilla as being like an action sci-fi star in the later movies, where he's fighting off other big bad monsters rather than primarily being the villain as he was in the original, where it was, this unstoppable force destroying Japan.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember my original point is that like Godzilla is like adjacent to horror nerd shit because horror nerds because horror is like I don't know like there's a nerd aspect to it I think and I mean that in an endearing way because I remember growing up with Godzilla and Nightmare on Elm Street and and I think maybe that is just the time period that I grew up even though there really wasn't a Godzilla movie until we got Roland Emmerich's, and then they did Godzilla 2000.
I think there was one Japanese one in the 80s. I kind of remember it having like the first thing you see is they go to the ship that's been destroyed and there were giant fleas on it that like attack the people. Anyways, I think that a good subcategory that you brought up, Kevin, would be that. Well, I don't know if it's necessarily a horror movie, but it is a monster movie. So
And that kind of goes, I don't know, it's like a bigger, I feel like monster equals horror in some regards, but then sci-fi action films kind of reshaped my thinking of it, anyways.
So why don't we go to like Alien and Predator since that kind of seems like the natural segue right there, right?
good job segueing, Kent.
Absolutely.
Hey, I demand a raise. Oh, uh, Kevin, why don't you talk about Alien and Predator? I don't feel like talking right now.
Okay, so, we're doing Alien Predator right now? Okay. Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
That was the
I
segue.
wanted
It
to,
was a great
okay,
segue.
okay, okay.
Don't ruin it, Kevin.
So let's go with Alien first. We're gonna do Ridley Scott, and which I think we can all agree is a horror film, even though it is obviously gonna be if there's a you're gonna put sci-fi first, then horror, but but it is very synonymous and it's like on you know most people's greatest horror films of all time. Aliens is kind of the difference of that. Predator is a lot like Aliens. Like those were movies I loved as a kid. My dad loved them because they had these action heroes in this other kind of, monster that they have never seen before. Unlike, Alien, it's they're cargo workers. Is that what they're doing? Yeah.
An
Is
Alien,
it-
yeah, yeah. They
Yeah.
they were,
So they more like
yeah.
military personnel. They didn't have any weapons besides like a flamethrower, which was like for other purposes rather than like burning people or creatures or
Yeah,
so
exactly. Yeah.
um yeah, so Aliens, and also I watched Terminator, and I think Terminator is a really good example as like Predator kind of almost feels like it goes a little more into like the Godzilla aspect, even though there's they are ripping people's arms off and it is a individual kills throughout. um Terminator, like on paper, is like almost like if he was using a knife instead of a gun, it's almost like a slasher all the way up to basically where we see the body horror aspect of them cutting up his face and we see the reveal of the Terminator underneath Arnold Schwarzenegger's skin. But it's like set up as the woman who we follow Linda Hamilton, who is, our final girl in the film, and like the pattern of murders is just people who are getting killed with her name. And if you look at it in that perspective and almost forget that, like, the little bit of information they give you about the Terminators in the beginning, it's like it's a horror film, you know, but the violence is all like action violence. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I think that kind
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
where you would put sci-fi action over horror, but I don't know. Also, the Terminator decomposes after a while. I didn't remember that. Like like he's smelling the guy is like knocking on his door because he smells dead because he's like dying, like at least the outer body of him and that.
Yeah, that was something they got away with
Yeah,
in the subsequent
yeah, I don't
entries.
remember that, but that leans way more towards the horror aspect of it. And also, James Cameron's first movie was Piranha 2, which is 100% horror film. But what do you guys think?
Good, Kent.
Well, all right. Alien is definitively horror to me. Because it's one of the scariest movies ever made. Like, it's still scary, if nothing else, due to claustrophobia. That one's very clear cut to me. Even if you say it's sci-fi horror, which it is, you go horror, sci-fi horror, it is definitely horror. If somebody wanted to argue that one, I feel like that'd be a really bad argument. Predator, on the other hand, uh, I don't know. Predator's a difficult one. That it is horror, but if somebody really just said, "Nope, it's sci-fi, it's action," and then horror at best is the third one, which it probably is. Okay, like I'm not mad if I went to a video store and I saw Predator in the action, because I would expect actually if I went to a video store and I thought, "Where am I going to find Predator?" I'd go to action first. That would make some sense to me. Um, Plus, you consider the cast; it was kind of like a an action movie cast. Uh, I don't know. It's one of those that's just several genres. And it's like a masterpiece, and yeah, it's not predominantly horror. And the same can go with Terminator. As I just watched most of it, I didn't finish it because I'm really bad with timing. Uh, yeah, I mean, in so many ways, it follows the hell. I mean, you can kind of compare it in some ways to like Halloween. Like it follows. Guys stalking, trying to get at this final girl, and he kills people along the ways. Okay, great music, looks good, kills are cool. Uh, the bad guy's badass. Like there's not a ton, like yes of course there's differences in the story, but if you kind of just break it down into like its most basic parts, I don't know what's so different between Terminator and Halloween. There's time traveling and one guy's
We
kind of just a dude and the other guy's a
Schwarzenegger has more
cyborg.
lines, you know.
Otherwise, yeah,
He's got
what's
catchphrases.
the difference? Yeah, no, yeah, I feel Michael would have failed if he had catchphrases. uh
I'm trying to think. Has
but
Michael really talked?
Only as a
aside from
kid,
the
right?
Rob Zombie
Yeah,
ones.
aside from those, I I haven't seen the newest ones.
The David Gordon Green ones?
Well, I saw the first one. I haven't seen the
I don't think he
Halloween.
says a
What
word
is it?
to my
Kills and ends.
recollection.
Yeah,
Ends. Yeah. No.
yeah. It's hard to have catchphrases if you don't talk. I mean,
Right. I don't. I would say I would not argue with anybody that wants to say Terminator is partially horror, but it's not predominantly horror. Once again, if you're in a video store and you say, where am I going to find it? I'm looking at action first. And if I don't find it there, I'm looking at sci-fi. I'm not remotely thinking to go to horror. But it has so much, when you break it down into its core aspects, yeah, it's a horror movie with action and sci-fi, so yeah. I'm not mad at anybody for choosing any of these as horror, but I just think that Alien is the only pure horror out of the three.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think it really has to do with uh the violence and is shot like an action film, and that was like the one thing where it kind of separated. But I think it was kind of, but it's all in that same realm. The same guys who were going to see the Nightmare on Elm Street movies are going to see the Arnold Schwarzenegger, Terminator, Predator, Alien 3, when that came out.
Here's what I remember is Predator, Terminator, Alien were all in a horror section in video stores. Aliens was put into horror as well, but I think I would probably classify Aliens more as sci-fi action adventure, and then horror as a third category. And then I remember they had a problem with Predator, not so much. I think Predator, they mostly kept up with horror until video stores started putting in a sci-fi section, and then Predator scooted over to sci-fi. But Terminator was definitely classified as a horror when it came out. And then Terminator 2 came out, and it was an action movie. And people were like, well, shit. You don't want to put two movies in the same series in separate sections of the movie store. So where the hell are we going to put them? I think that was part of when they started throwing in a sci-fi category in and of itself in order to have, a place to easily classify them. But I do think that all three of those can be considered horror movies. Especially, Alien, I don't think there's an argument. Terminator, part of the other reason I would consider it a horror movie, even though it falls along the lines of a horror movie, is because he's basically unstoppable. They don't have another Terminator to fight him. They don't have special weapons to fight him. No matter what they do up until the very end, the dude is just keeps on coming, and he keeps on coming, and he keeps on coming. And, that was pretty scary for the 80s, especially, enough with Schwarzenegger acting the part, but then when the skin gets ripped off and you see what's underneath, there's a reason why that T-800 is so iconic, even though we've had way cooler fucking Terminator since then with the T-1000. I forgot whatever the hell model that Kristanna Lokins was in Terminator 3, which was about the only good thing about that movie. Even the version that fucking what's his name played in the last one that was, I guess, the second to last one that was kind of shitty.
Genesis?
Yeah, where's the nanobots?
Yeah. Because, in the first one, he feels like a fucking movie monster.
Yeah.
And that alone gives you enough room to qualify it.
And I really think that probably the only reason that more people don't think of the first Predator as a horror movie is because Arnold's in it as the hero. If it was somebody who couldn't physically fight back against the Predator, it would be a different movie. But I think, a dude who's invisible, who's fucking ripping people's fucking skulls and spinal cords out of their body, carrying them around with him, that's... I don't know if it's necessarily nightmare fuel, but I think it's just as up there as, an implacable cyborg. So, that's my take on it.
Let me ask you this. Then, what's the difference between Predator and something like Surviving the Game, which we clearly wouldn't call horror? I don't think anybody's going to call Surviving the Game a horror movie.
Yeah, no,
Definitely not.
I wouldn't. But
But there's a lot of similarities too.
there are a lot of similarities. But I mean, again, I think part of that can factor into the violence aspect of what people consider horror. In Surviving the Game, it's what, bows, traps, and guns killing people. In Predator, you have Did we have the shoulder cannon in the first one?
Oh.
I don't remember, but
No, I don't remember now.
I mean, we do see the dude again. He's able to turn invisible. He rips fucking people's heads off. He carries them around with him.
Collects them
I mean,
as trophies.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the difference. And at that point, we didn't really know what for, because we didn't have the context of like the ship from Predator 2. So I mean, it was kind of like this. It was an alien that we didn't understand who was just hunting us for sport. But yeah, I mean, it could be argued, and again, I think like a reason why people would argue that is because it starts as an action movie and it ends as an action movie with one of the most jacked actors we've ever seen in Hollywood, fighting back against this creature.
Yeah, I agree
Yep.
with it getting all lumped together with just Arnold Schwarzenegger action star with his other films.
Yeah.
But I do remember it. I do remember that cool ass cover of the VHS with the Arnold's face in the infrared being in the horror section. When it first came out. It's like, oh, Dad, it looks cool. Can we rent it? He's like, I don't know if you're gonna like it.
And then you loved it.
And then we watched it. And
Yeah.
I loved it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was one of the first movie my dad claims that we ever owned. So I never really picked that out of the video store section because I was lucky enough to own it. And I was like, what, 8 years
Yeah.
old,
Yeah. I mean,
Of like
that makes
the-
sense. Yeah. Great.
Just like what my perspective then, and I guess what I was really thinking about watching those James Cameron movies is that they were just movies, like, and those were just kind of like the movies that my dad rented were a lot of action movies, horror movies, science fiction films, and they all kind of connected, with, Arnold Schwarzenegger and a lot of it, like Raw Deal and Commando, Terminator, Predator. They were just all just great movies, just The Running
You didn't say
Man,
Running
yes,
Man.
which was written by originally by horror writer Stephen King under the pen name Richard Bachman.
I'll be interested in seeing how the remake of that comes out, because they're supposedly sticking way closer to the story.
I'm not optimistic about it because there's so many things sometimes, like with Stephen King stories, that what makes it great is, like, what makes the films great is where they go astray from the story. Like some of the stuff that they went astray from in The Shining made the film The Shining stand out. So I don't know. I'm curious. Obviously, I want to give it a watch, but I don't know. I think nostalgia's going to win the day for me on Running Man, but I'm still excited to see it. So something we were talking about, especially with Predator, was like in Terminator, was like how the violence is. Because how the violence is presented also can go from like action to horror. Like that kind of matters. So if I say, why is Saw a horror movie and Seven? I don't think Seven is a horror movie, but I know some people may argue Seven is, but I don't think it is. Like, do either of you guys think Seven's a horror movie?
No is the short answer, but there's a but. with all right, so why I don't think it's a horror film is because we get it through the detective's perspective, and we don't see any of the kills in the film. It's like the only person who gets killed is uh the killer on screen, and then we get the victims' bodies and what's in the box. All of that is done off screen, and I feel like that constitutes more as a thriller in this other perspective. Like almost like have you guys seen Steven Spielberg's first movie, The Duel? So
Yep.
so that is that a horror film? Not really, but we get the entire perspective through the victim, and we don't get the killer at all, or whatever, if he is a killer. You know what I mean?
Actually, I kind of think of Duel as a horror movie, but it probably isn't. It's probably more thriller. Yeah, it's probably more thriller than horror, but it is because of the perspective. I don't know. You feel on the edge of
Yeah,
your seat,
and
especially the first
but
time
it's
you see
like
it.
almost like the other side of a horror film where we don't get the, you know, like, is this a deranged killer? It does have a very horror feel to it, but yeah, I don't know, that really like kind of stuck with me. Was you If you think of it, it is like a horror film, but it's all through the perspective of this victim. We don't get more. We don't get
I mean,
the mysteriousness of the guy in the truck. Kind of really gives it a horror aspect, but it's really the mystery makes it feel more thrillerish.
basically, Duel existed, and then they made Joyride to be like, just in case you didn't think Duel was a horror movie, we're gonna make sure that you think this
Yeah,
is a horror movie.
agree.
It,
Yeah.
Chris, where do you fall on Seven?
Uh, I think it's a thriller. I don't think it's a horror, but it's one of those rare movies that hits so nihilistically for me that it really affected me after I watched it the first time. Same kind of, other things that would be in that vein and genre were, stuff like Miracle Mile, Seven, Requiem for a Dream. Things that are just so disgustingly bleak about human nature. Really bother me.
Would you put Primal Fear in that category too? I was thinking about that.
No, I mean, I think that qualifies. I think it's a thriller, but it didn't get me that much. I liked it more after on rewatches than I did on the first watch. But I mean, it's definitely apparent that David Fincher knows how to direct a horror movie, because I think Aliens 3 or Alien 3, I forget which is severely underrated, and I would have loved to have seen what he could have done with that without the studio interference.
Yeah, it would have been
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, and my original point, which is something I said in the beginning, is like Seven is one of those movies. Is I feel like it's a disservice to say that this is a horror film, because if you went in with someone, if you said, "Hey, watch Seven, it's a horror film," and I watch it, and I would be like thrown off by it because I'd be expecting it to be different. But if you just watch Seven and you take it in, it has horror aspects to it, especially with the gluttony thing in the very beginning, because they like hang out in that dude's apartment and they go through like all of the what that guy went through, like just talk by like talking. It's all in dialogue. It's like we don't see it. Do they do little flashes of it? Of like him going to the store or something, maybe?
That sounds right.
Yeah,
It,
but it's mostly all off camera.
I would also like. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody who was our grandparents' generation were to see Seven and be like, "That's a horror film." Honestly, I think
I
like an
could see
older
it,
generation
yeah.
would see that.
And Primal Fear, if that came out in 1962, would that, people being like, wow, you see that horror film? It's like when Norman Bates
Yeah,
reveals himself, and when Edward Norton reveals himself in that film.
yeah. 30 years makes a huge fucking difference, though, because I still think Psycho. I think of Psycho as a horror, even though it's thriller, suspense, whatever. Like I think it. I don't know. As I said in podcast or two ago, I think it is that bridge that's bridge the gaps between early days of film to the 70s. I think it is kind of like one of the more definitive horror movies, even though it doesn't feel horror nowadays.
And it feels like an old-fashioned kind of like noir film, and it even isn't like a noir film either, but it has that feel to it, especially with the detective, and then the whole end scene where they kind of just describe everything and kind of give you the explanation so it all kind of makes sense when you see Norman Bates with that knife and the wig.
Yeah, the knife and the wig really tied the movie together for me, no doubt.
And then you get like the skull, like the I mean, it does.
Yeah,
It's very, you know, horror centric. Especially with that scene where she spins the chair around and it's the decayed body.
yeah.
I love Psycho.
Um,
It,
all right.
it feels to me like From Dusk Till Dawn owes a lot to Psycho.
Because it goes from like one thing to another.
Yeah, it starts off as one type of genre movie, and after a shocking event, transitions into a horror movie. I don't know if it's exactly halfway through, but towards the midpoint of the film, which is then nothing like what the original beginning of the film was like.
Yeah, I would agree, and it's both times, like when you see it for the first time, it's both like a pleasant surprise, quite frankly. I don't know. Imagine if Psycho had just kind of stayed just kept it as a noir, or whatever, and didn't go deeper into a horror. Like that movie just wouldn't be as good, most likely. And From Dusk Till Dawn, certainly. From Dusk Till Dawn could have still been an amazing movie had they just kept the same tone before going to the fucking bar. But I don't know. I'm happy with what we got.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. It's almost like when I loved Quentin Tarantino movies. So when it switches, you almost don't want it to switch to a horror film because you just want the crime film to go on. And Quentin Tarantino, his performance was so cool in that movie. And then once it turns into a horror film, he goes pretty quickly, even though, he,
Yeah,
arguably is the
yeah,
most despicable character in that whole movie. But,
yeah. No problem. I'll eat it for you.
yeah, whatever. Sure.
Did you mean what you said back there? So, all right, I'll ask another one. Since it's another Stephen King thing, Misery, Annie Wilkes is like I don't know. I've gone back and forth on this one a lot, and I don't even know where I fall on this one at all. Where it's definitely horror adjacent. I don't know. I don't even know what the primary thing is. Do I consider it primary horror, thriller, drama? It's a weird amalgamation of many things, which the most confusing ones that we've talked about are like they're just equally representative of many genres. What would you guys even consider the primary genre for Misery?
I'm going to say horror.
I would say probably horror, thriller, drama.
I think I'm going thriller first, and the only reason why I'm skeptical is because of the hobbling scene.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely some body horror right there.
Yeah, like it's really if you want to say like go by best horror movie scenes of all time, if somebody puts that in their top 10, I'm not questioning that at all.
That's like actually terrifying. It comes from like a real place. And obviously Stephen King as a writer and being as famous as he is, like that or I don't know what was a precursor to that before that book came out. Like I don't know if Selena didn't happen, right? Where Selena gets stabbed by her fan.
I I think it was more pro. It was like people were putting pressure on him to write sequels, and that's kind of where the premise came from for Misery.
Obsessed fan where they love you so much, but they're dangerous, and that's a very dangerous, you know, thing to have when
Yeah.
you're yeah. So I that movie is actually scary, and there is something about that. And also it came from Stephen King, so it gets just kind of tagged along as like a horror film. I feel like the same thing happened with Nope, Jordan Peele's Nope, because he made two horror films. This is close enough, and it's another Jordan Peele horror film, but there's so much more going on with that movie than to just call it a horror film. You know,
Would you consider the De Niro Wesley Snipes movie The Fan horror? Because it's kind of touching on a similar. I mean, it's touching on the same topic. It's just played out
have
differently.
you seen
Of course.
the Fan with Michael Biehn? I
I
think it's
have
what it was
not.
based on. It's like an actress. I forget the name of the actress, but yeah, there's an actress and Michael Biehn is stalking her, and he's the fan, and that definitely feels more horror than the Tony Scott's The Fan, and I would say that probably because it's directed by Tony Scott and he has this uh you know uh, as an auteur action film aesthetic of like the way the editing and the filming and the lighting of his films are, it it gives you motion sickness just like Top Gun and True Romance and Man on Fire, all Tony Scott films. So I think again, what you're saying is absolutely right, but I think it's because of the way the most of the violence, or just the way the shot, the editing is, and the camera movements just has an action feel to it.
I would say probably not, Kent. And I think a good portion of that is because Wesley Snipes isn't helpless for the majority of the movie, whereas James Caan
Right.
is physically helpless, being not just manipulated, but drugged and, bodily
That's the
injured. Yeah.
hugest difference. It's exactly the reason why one is horror and the other, or at least closer
The
to horror than the other
vulnerability.
one is. Just vulnerability
Yeah.
matters. Like James Caan just didn't have his options. I feel like something else that kind of can go hand in hand with horror is how limited your options are.
Yeah. I mean, I think this goes back to what we were just discussing, like why people would argue Predator is or isn't a horror movie. I mean, you have Arnold Schwarzenegger and a group of special forces dudes, along with, Carl Weathers, fighting this fucking sci-fi thing. Now imagine if it was going after, like, the cast of Scream. It would be a much different situation in that situation.
How would the cast of Scream handle Predator?
I don't know.
I think Dewey would make it, but he would be so injured.
He would have gotten stabbed a few times.
He would have died in the
minimal.
first movie, straight up. Uh,
Would Billy Loomis have made it to the last 20 minutes?
well, I think the question is, well, would Sydney be impregnated by the end of the first one when she loses her virginity? Yeah,
That's the hope and the
face
dream.
sucking.
I have a feeling Stu would got.
Oh, yeah.
Gail would have got. She'd be like, "Oh, let me go find this stuff." Ah!
She wants to go interview the fucking predator and then write a memoir about it, and
Stu would
he
be.
just ain't having it.
I mean, I think Tatum would make it. She wouldn't have a garage door to get stuck in.
That,
Would Drew Barrymore have survived?
She wouldn't have even got on the
Yeah.
chopper, so she would have been good.
she would have been good.
Would we have had like who would do the infamous handshake? Like, are we going to do Sydney and Gail? Like, are they going to do the muscle bound handshake?
But don't they do that? in Scream 4? 5?
Didn't they do that in Scream 6?
Well, she's not in Scream 6, but basically. But Scream 5 is very much like.
Well, damn it! Now I'm demanding Scream 7. We have a remake of Predator Handshake between. Bring Sydney back, get Gail, and let's do it. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, I realize
guys.
now that I was confusing aliens and and the Predator. I don't think Nev Campbell would get pregnant in the Predator movie.
I liked her.
That would be a really... I mean, I've probably read that fan fiction somewhere.
It's somewhere there on the internet in animation form.
Absolutely. All right. Here's
We
the one
kind of
I've been
got
waiting
that in
for.
Aliens vs. Predator Requiem, so...
Oh God! Don't remind me that happened. That fucking movie. All right, Kevin. I know you wanted to, you may have jokingly brought this up, but I want to hear it. Twilight.
You know, I couldn't make it through it again. Like, I just couldn't do it. Like, it's so hard for me to make it through those movies. I don't think I've seen the second one. It's really hard for me to pay attention to them. So, but the first one, I really didn't make it far enough to even decide that it is a horror film. But it's got horror in it, at least in the third category. But I wouldn't. Teen romance is like I think the first. Yeah,
like the first
and
13
fantasy,
categories
and it's more
of it.
fantasy than horror.
Yeah, just because it has vampires and werewolves does not make it horror. But I imagine somebody would probably argue for it. I don't know. There's got to be somebody out there.
Depending how old
right?
No, I don't think there's a single person in this world who would describe.
There's a 10-year-old girl out there that was like the first horror movie she ever saw.
Absolutely.
Oh, what would
Yeah.
be scary?
And now she's a
Peter
big fan of
Cushing.
What was
horror.
scary? Like, okay, well, that was actually probably his best performance. So
Yeah,
I
it's like
can't
free-
take that from him.
Really well done. He's like the best part of the movie. Super creepy though. Super creepy.
I mean, I think if we're looking at scary Peter Facinelli performances, like, what was it? Supernova would probably have to be the
Oh,
top
I have not
for me.
seen that. I got to put it on the list.
Or Scorpion King. I mean, that one
He was in
was
that?
high up there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
He had long hair and a beard, and he was the king's son who you think is going to be like a cool fight, and then Michael Clark Duncan just fucking murks the shit
Sounds
out of him.
terrifying.
I don't think horror is any one of those 13 titles that would be applied to those movies. Young adult, teen romance, sci-fi, superhero, bad. I mean,
Sports.
It does have a
yeah.
superhero vibe
Yeah.
to it. And like it
yeah, all of the vampires have superpowers. The werewolves are all telepaths.
If only they were cops, we could also say it's a buddy cop
I mean,
movie.
I guess probably the horror aspect would be when you get to the last one and they have the baby, and then Jacob imprints on her. So you're like, oh, so this guy who was just in love with Bella, almost enough to commit suicide when she married the vampire and became one, is now going to dedicate himself to being in love with their daughter, who is an infant.
I'm glad I didn't make it past the first
That's-
movie.
yeah,
because
now I
everything
kind
you
of
just said
want
is
to
creepy
watch
as
all
fuck.
of
It
them.
is creepy.
Chris?
I mean, think about the fact that 50 Shades of Grey is a Twilight fanfic. And that should give you an idea of like
Yeah,
where
I
it ends.
never seen the 50 Shades of Grey movies either, and I worked in a sex shop for like 4 years.
Yeah, I have a wife. I mean,
I saw it
just
once,
just be
and
glad.
it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was. Like, it wasn't nearly as kinky as I was under the impression. But like, I don't know, it wasn't like a horrible movie.
No,
Like,
they were just it was like Twilight. They were just
yeah,
meh. Yeah, like
right.
I mean, especially the first one, you could definitely see that it was early in a bunch of their careers. Like you look at the scene in Twilight where Robert Pattinson has to do the whole "I smell Bella" thing, and he has to react to that. It's so over the top, but I think he's ended up becoming a really good actor.
Yeah.
I've liked a lot of the stuff he's been in more recently. You know, Tenet. Shit, what was that one he was in the post-apocalyptic one he was in Australia? That was really good.
He was in Good Manners. I want to say
about
was the
Robert
name
Pattinson?
of one.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, I like Good Time. Is Good Time, the
Oh,
Safdie
Good Time,
brothers
not
movie.
Good Manners, my bad.
That movie's intense. And he's great with his Staten Island accent.
it's funny you mentioned the whole smell thing, Chris, because I still have a still frame from Twilight when I was watching it for my blog, where there's like Edward, Bella, and somebody else I want to feel like are in a vehicle, and I just happened to pause it because I was getting like a phone call or something, and they all have this look on their face like somebody ripped ass in the vehicle, and like they all just look disgusted at the same time, but like it doesn't go with anything that's happening on screen at the moment. It was just like one of those weird frames that you catch. It's like you can interpret it so much differently than what was really happening.
Oh, shit, how can I forget that he was in
that's
fucking The
one of his-
Lighthouse?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I thought that was a gift.
I fucking
Performances,
forgot.
yeah.
And you know what? But anyways, I also think Kristen Stewart is turned out to be a pretty amazing
I
actress
agree.
as well. Definitely way more versatile than I would have expected from the shit she gave us as Bella back in Twilight. I really liked
did,
Underwater.
actually,
If you
for
guys didn't see
October.
that one,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
I just bought it.
I saw Welcome or Meet the Rileys, I think the name of it. It's a James Gandolfini movie. It was the first Kristen Stewart movie I saw, and I was like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
she's
I
pretty
remember
good
that
in that. And then the Runaways movie. Is it what's called The Runaways? Yeah,
yeah, the one with
I think she
her
was,
and Dakota
I was
Fanning.
like,
Yeah,
Joan Jett,
yeah, she was really good.
Stewart, and then
Yeah, she fucking looked like her. I was really yeah.
And I thought she was amazing in Spencer. And my favorite performance is Certain Women with Kelly Reichardt, but Michelle Williams is in it too. I don't know if you guys know who Kelly Reichardt is, but she's got it's like three stories and they kind of connect, but she's got the best story. She has the best performance and story in that section of the film. So,
Anyways, I feel we've kind of gotten off topic with Twilight. So.
sorry.
Did we need to say anything more about Jaws, or did we talk about it enough earlier in the episode? I think we pretty much definitively hit it, right?
I think we can agree that for its time it was horror, but looking back now, 40, 50? Whatever years later, it just doesn't feel like a horror, but it was
And it
at the
didn't-
time. Like, hell, are we going to consider Blair Witch
should
a
be.
horror movie in 30 years?
Well, the original.
Well, which one? The Blair Witch Project or the Blair Witch?
The Blair Witch Project, for clarification. Because, I'd love to talk about Book of Shadows
Book
more.
of Shadows is a horror film.
Time's limited here. It's an amazing film.
It's something. I didn't realize it was the first thing I saw Jeffrey Donovan in. I don't think we'll ever get away from Blair Witch being a horror movie because it gave us basically the rise of the found footage genre. And you can't be like, oh, look at all these found footage horror movies without crediting them to the success of Blair Witch for as little money as it was made for.
And the ending actually scared
Yeah, I
me.
think that's fair.
And also, they did this great promotion of making it feel real with that sci-fi documentary. It's like, how many people had the Sci-Fi Channel back then? I didn't even realize until like it became this whole like, no, this is real people, and yeah, you had to. I mean, I think you had to experience it at that time to have that level of horror when I saw it the first time. But
So, another weird movie day for me. This was back before, we had hindsight, but I went and saw The Sixth Sense with my mom in the afternoon, and they had been marketing it, as a pretty strongly as a horror movie. It was early enough that people hadn't broken the twist yet. So, I remember, it wasn't scary, but, there were scenes with some tension in there. And then I went home, and a couple hours later, I went back to the movies, and I watched The Blair Witch Project by myself. It was scary. The ending was scary. Like, I remember that scene with Mike staring into the corner. Yeah, I think it was Mike staring into the corner. Josh was the one who left earlier. Bothered me, before What's-Her-Face gets whacked with the shovel or whatever.
Well, like everything leading up to it, like the little handprints on the wall and everything was really horror.
And then I got home and I watched Nightmare on Elm Street for the first time. And between those three movies that day, I was like, it took me a long time to get to bed that night.
Yeah, but Sixth Sense
sure.
paled in
that was just the warm up
to those movies. But the one thing that really freaked me out about that movie, like out of everything, well, the ending with the little girl, but just the beginning when Toni Collette like leaves the room for a second and all the cabinets were open. That was
that
like
shit still
probably the creepiest part of that movie.
If she comes in and the cabinets are open, she fucking flips out.
Like Paranormal Activity 3 happening here.
No, like we have a son. or me. I forget shit now. I'll say it when she's not around to hear me.
Yeah. Oh, you probably just do it on purpose now, right? Yeah. I didn't do it.
It's sad that Sixth Sense will always get talked about more than Stir of Echoes. That will always make me very sad.
Dude,
Dude,
I watched a video this Halloween season from one of the reviewers I watch, and he did Stir of Echoes finally. And he was like, I forgot what he said, but he was like, people were saying that Sixth Sense was a better movie. I was like, I don't know a single fucking person who ever said Sixth Sense was a better movie than Stir of Echoes once they saw Stir of Echoes. And I was like, that's a fucking hill I'll die on.
Yeah, because I don't know anybody that would actually say it, but yet the perception among, people, like you read about it, Sixth Sense makes lists. Stir of Echoes never makes fucking lists. Sixth Sense will be in like video countdowns and shit. Stir of Echoes rarely ever talked about, but yet anybody that ever has seen both of them, I don't think I've ever heard anybody go, yeah, Stir of Echoes was just not as good as Sixth Sense. No, never happens.
They came out within like 3 months of each other. That was the problem.
Well, yeah, that is the problem. It got overshadowed because Stir of Echoes also seemed like a pretty big, obviously not as big as The Sixth Sense because, Saturday Night Live, every sitcom that was on at the time had a.
I mean, the biggest thing was definitely the marketing.
Joke.
Like, they blew a ton of money on the marketing for The Sixth Sense, and it worked. I mean, it was up for Academy Awards. And Stir of Echoes, I think it was it Lionsgate? Whoever it was who released it was not to the point where they're at now. Because, like, I remember the first couple of Lionsgate films that I saw. Shit.
Artisan.
I think Saw was a Lionsgate film.
Yeah.
And it it was still a relatively small production company at the time.
Artisan Entertainment.
Yep, there you
They're
go.
the ones that did
Yep.
Blair Witch,
Yep.
I believe. So, yeah, it was all about the stupid twist ending, which became this pop culture bullshit. There's nothing from Stir of Echoes that's really pop culture-ish. I mean, aside from drinking a lot of orange juice and listening to Paint It Black.
Yeah, Painted Black, I was going to say.
Kevin Bacon in a Social Distortion T-shirt.
And
That's
his hot wife.
that should be embedded into pop culture. Boy,
Kathy
Catherine
Aaron.
Irby?
Yeah, she was
I don't know.
the main person opposite Vincent D'Onofrio in Law and Order: Criminal Intent.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
Kevin Dunn's always a delight, I feel.
Great
There's
character
something
actor.
with
Yeah.
Ileana Douglas.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that was just a really packed year for horror movies. I mean, shit, we had Blair Witch, earlier, so obviously they threw their advertising money into that instead of into Stir of Echoes, which is a shame.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. It really is a shame because I don't think Stir of Echoes will ever quite get its proper due, and yet everybody that's seen it, knows the truth. It's just, yeah, marketing really happened.
Marketing awards, they saw a way, they must have seen a way to get, in the awards season bracket, you know what I mean? Like they could see it getting nominated for things, I don't know. Did Bruce Willis get nominated for that?
I don't know. I mean, and at the
No,
time
it
was
doesn't.
Bruce Willis. He was bigger than Bacon.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, I mean,
Oh,
at
yeah.
the time, Bruce Willis was probably one of the top 3 actors in Hollywood, pay-wise.
Bruce Willis was a movie star, and Kevin Bacon refers to himself as an actor. The difference being is Kevin Bacon would be in The Sleepers,
Oh, so good.
he'd be, Kevin Bacon would play a creep and feel like it wouldn't hurt his career as an actor, but
Yeah.
Bruce Willis never really did anything like that. I mean, he was in Pulp Fiction, but
Yeah. Actually, you know what?
very different.
99 was a good year in horror. Because I was like, was House on Haunted Hill 99? And it sure was.
Yeah, I was actually looking that up too. Well,
That's...
we had it pretty good, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think... I don't know, just to let people know, I really am going to push for us to do, like, little snippets of, like, picking a random year and picking, like, our 3 favorite horror movies of the year as, like, an ending.
I would say I feel really spoiled because yeah, I would say every decade that I've been alive in has had a great horror resurgence. Yeah, like
Yeah.
the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. The 2010s, yeah,
for sure.
and the 20s. Yeah.
Whether you like it or not. If you're into the movies.
Here's a question. At this point in time, is M. Night Shyamalan still considered predominantly a horror director?
I don't think so. I
I
wouldn't think so.
I think probably
I feel
yes.
like 50-50.
Because look at everything he's done since his semi comeback.
Yeah,
It's all been horror adjacent. It was what
Yeah.
Visit, Old, and
Knock at the Cabin.
Yeah,
like those are all good movies too. And let's not ever forget, and you know where I'm going with this, The Fucking Happening. The greatest horror movie ever made.
Is that a horror movie?
I mean,
It's a horrible movie, yes.
yeah, horrible.
Oh,
Hey,
I mean,
it's the plants in the air. Say hi to your mother.
I may
for me.
watch that tonight. I may.
Is that Zoe Deschanel?
Oh God, everything about that fucking.
It had some really cool kills. Like
It
some
did.
really eerie
think it's
scenery.
great.
But
I think it's great up until John Leguizamo leaves.
And you can't say that about a single other film in the history of film.
Yeah. I mean, not everything. I mean, except for the exception of like Mark Wahlberg introducing himself as a teacher character. Like I could have done without that, but they needed it later for the plot. But and it's whatever. But yeah, M. Night Shyamalan. I heard him or I read an interview about kind of his comeback, and he said he for a while didn't want to be known as just doing thrillers all the time, but he's kind of like, well, it's cool that like I'm allowed to do thrillers, and they're still letting me make movies, even so I think that's kind of why we're getting such good stuff from him, but Unbreakable, that's a gray area kind of movie.
Oh yeah, for sure.
A horror
I
film.
mean, oh yeah, I mean, I guess how could we forget Glass and Split? Yeah, sorry.
Split.
Yeah,
Yeah, Glass doesn't feel
it
like
doesn't,
a horror
but Split
film.
did.
Unbreakable,
Yeah.
but Split
Yeah.
absolutely does, because
Yeah.
kidnapping women, that'll do it.
All right, here's a question. Well, no, I know not all ghost movies have to be horror, but like I feel like ghost movies are kind of tricky because usually a lot of ghost movies actually have like a drama aspect to them. Like, I don't know, just say The Others, for example. I don't know, is The Others predominantly a horror movie?
At the end of the day, yes.
I think it hits because of the tone.
Yeah. Whereas the movie Ghost, clearly.
Oh yeah, Ghost. Shit, what was that one with David Harbour on Netflix this year where he plays?
Oh, yeah. I can't remember the name of it, but
Yeah.
yes.
Shit, Ghostbusters. I mean, ghosts, not a horror.
Yeah, but you could watch Ghostbusters. Well, I don't know. Ghostbusters kind of like a Christmas movie, but also feels like people watch it for Halloween season. If you have kids or whatever, you're kind of looking.
I mean, shit.
Haunted Mansion.
People watch Hocus Pocus, for Halloween,
Yeah.
and that's not necessarily like a scary movie.
No.
Right.
Well, I mean, it's scary to me that people love that movie so much, but
I've still never seen it.
yeah, I've never watched the entire thing.
Does not appeal. Wasn't it like last year when it hit like the sequel came out on Disney Plus and everybody kind of collectively lost their minds for 24 hours and then everybody's like, "Oh yeah, that wasn't that good."
Yeah, pretty much. Although they're making a third one.
And they complained that it wasn't good, and it's like, how could you possibly think that it was gonna hold up?
Lessons weren't learned.
Yeah.
All right, do we have anybody else we want to discuss, talk about, or bring into context on this?
Wizard of Oz.
That's a good one. Another thing is, no, I don't think it's horror, but there is elements that are scary, and I think it's fantasy is the primary or musical would be, even though would be the primary genre.
Yeah, I mean it's probably fantasy musical. At some point though, there is some horror aspects that, especially as a kid.
Oh yeah, the monkeys.
Yeah, that shit can be freaky.
I mean, the witch melting.
Yeah,
The witch getting the house dropped on her, and then they get the slippers and the feet ravel up. Like that was that.
Or
that was weird as a little kid.
Think back to the beginning, in something we just watched recently, when Dorothy falls into the fucking pig pen and they start going fucking berserk. I mean, I've like no picture that happening in Hannibal.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was picturing.
yeah. I guess Wizard of Oz was probably the last one I could really think of. I don't know, because I feel like we've kind of covered like the basic questionable genres, like or subgenres, I guess.
Yeah.
Whatever. So I don't know. I don't have any others on my proverbial list to discuss. I don't know if you guys did or not.
What about you, Kevin? You got anything else you want to bring up?
Well, to answer Kent's question they asked a long time ago that I don't think I got around to. The difference would be with Seven and Saw is, and we'll just talk about Saw in general, is you get to see everything and you get it through all these different perspectives, and the aspect of like torturing people and actually watching it, and like, ah man, like there's a big shock feeling to it, and the film is designed to pull out these things out of you, like disgust, cringing, like not looking at the screen and looking at the screen, and I don't know, like I don't think I've ever gotten nauseous of a Saw movie, except for maybe uh the newest one, because there's a kind of the big end scene is kind of nauseating. Um,
Is that one worse to you than part 3 with the brain the brain surgery gets me in part
the
3.
brain surgery, yeah, but I mean, I kind of already saw that in RoboCop 2. But yeah, no, that definitely has a horror aspect to it. On the history of horror, they talked about Contagion. If you guys, the Steven Soderbergh movie, and that's not necessarily something I'd consider horror, but they have this kind of argument about it because we see someone get their head cut open in that scene, that it has this, horror. That's what makes it a horror film. Also around like the outbreak.
Are you referring to the Eli Roth thing that was like on Shudder,
Yes.
AMC at
Yeah,
one
yeah,
point? Yeah.
Where they're doing like the outbreak movies,
Yeah.
I would
I think.
I would say to kick into your answer to pick you off, Kevin.
yeah.
The Saw franchise definitely went further into horror the further it went. But if you look at the first one, it is relatively restrained in what it shows. Like you don't really see the violence compared to what you do in, say, like part 6 or part 7.
Yeah, and not till the end too.
yeah.
Not until like they're cutting their legs off.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the only. Yeah,
Like you see the guy thrashing in the razor wire, but it's all hypercuts and not just showing it. The guy who burns alive, you don't really, it flashes away once the flame engulfs him, and you see Amanda cut into the dude's stomach, but it's not lingering on the shots, as she's pulling the key out or anything. But yeah, like think back to part 6 when the guy gets hit with the acid at the very end, and you see his whole body just kind of disintegrate into pieces, or the scene with like Linkin Park's lead singer, where they're pulling their skin off, trying to get off of the super glue to the car, and then the car lands on the other dude's head, and you see that straight up. Or even the beginning scene from that, with the two guys fighting over the girl and the saw. Yeah.
Yeah.
which one was that again? That one was great.
That was part
Oh
6.
yeah,
That was the opening of
was that
Yeah.
the 3D one?
Yeah.
3D, yeah.
Yeah, I love that one.
I just like eventually they're just like, this bitch is playing us.
So, I mean, I think an argument could be made around the first one either way. But like you said, like it is way more visual than it is in 7. Like we only ever see the after effects in 7, and even then, like gluttony, we see the guy slumped over the table, but we don't really see, all of the effects.
Watch that guy stuffing
yeah.
his face.
Yeah.
And like even like a 5-minute scene of like that 24 or however 72-hour period where he just has this dude like tied up and just making him eat, it would definitely be a horror film.
Same thing with like Greed. We see the guy's body on the ground and the pieces of flesh cut off, but we don't see him actually doing it. I mean, probably one of the most horrific things in that movie is Sloth. When like they think the guy's dead and he fucking moves and they realize that this guy's basically fucking brain dead because he has been just barely kept alive for a year. His skin is disintegrating, all that shit. But like,
I think that's the best scene of the whole movie, quite frankly.
but Lust, like we see Leland Orser and the effects it had on him, but we don't actually see what was done to the prostitute. So
We just get the clip of like the thing. We get the Polaroid picture of the thing that he used on her. Yeah.
yeah.
So if we saw that, then it would definitely be a horror. Yeah, oh my god, the
Can we get like an extended cut of Seven with all the all the? Give us an additional 2 hours of Seven with all this stuff, and I think you have a batshit crazy movie.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know if I want to watch that.
I do. I'm in.
I mean, I just watched The Sadness again for the second time today, and I'm all like ready for some more crazy shit. So,
I got that on my list too. I was.
oh, Kevin, you're going to be in for such a treat. I can't normally tell you that you're going to like something, but you're going to like The Sadness. You're going to like the way you
Nice.
feel.
Yeah, it came up, I don't know, somehow, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna add this to my list, and then it was like already on my watch list, and I was like, oh, how did I come across that? And now I remember you suggested it, Kat.
Absolutely. All right. So, I don't know. Do we have any? Is there any other films that we got to dissect of if it is or isn't, or any other subgenres or anything? Or are we pretty much?
I think we're pretty much.
The only thing we didn't really touch on like comedy horror, but I feel like that's pretty easy. Like Army of Darkness and fucking Shaun of the Dead. It's clear cut.
I think the hardest thing would be like, are there any comedy thrillers?
I mean, there's got to be. I mean, almost like 48 Hours, or maybe some of like those Eddie Murphy. Maybe the first Beverly Hills Cop.
I don't know, man. Like,
But the action is more prevalent than
yeah,
thriller.
yeah, and the comedy, like, like I think of thriller. I think of something like Seven. Is there like a comedy of Seven? Maybe Seven Psychopaths a little bit.
Oh, Seven Psycho. I typed in thriller comedies and I see Glass Onion brought up, but
Oh,
I don't even know if that would
I don't
count.
consider that a fucking.
oh, because it's got that
Whatever.
murder mystery aspect to it. I actually get why that would be.
I get it. I don't think I.
Maybe shit. If maybe something like.
What about The Menu?
Yeah,
I could
I
see
actually
that one.
see that more as a comedy thriller than a horror film. Now that you, now that you bring it up,
Yeah, or Ready or Not is another really that's definitely fucking comedy.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to go comedy horror or comedy thriller, but it's definitely fucking funny as hell.
Something, I don't know, maybe something like Suicide Kings or Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead.
Yeah, those are yeah.
there's
So we have options,
Yeah.
I guess.
I wouldn't consider Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead a comedy, but the movie makes me laugh so much.
I don't know. I mean, Tree Williams in that. It's like, when you're in the basement, they tell you to eat a turd. You eat the turd.
I keep my powder dry. Keep my powder dry. Oh yes, the fecal freak. All right, have we come to a
Clue.
conclusion?
No, we were never going to come to a conclusion. It was just.
I feel like we're
more
on the same page, though.
Yeah, no matter what, there's always going to be like little disagreements, but yeah, there's just some kind of basic things that make a horror, and at the end of the day, as you watch it, you kind of get a certain vibe. I don't know. Some things last with you as a kid, some things last with you as you get older. I don't know, like, would Black Phone really upset you as a kid, or does it upset you more as an adult, for example? I don't know. I think Black Phone actually would probably be more upsetting as an adult than a child, though.
Huh? That's interesting. I think it. I don't know. Would compare Black Phone to, because I obviously didn't see it as a kid, but Lady in White, where the kid like gets locked in the school. I think it's Lucas Haas. Gets locked in the school, sees this ghost girl, and I don't know. That movie freaked me out a lot as a kid. Uh, and I don't know if Black Phone would do that because you'd be like rooting for this kid that's like trapped in the. I don't know. I think Black Phone probably would scare me a lot as a kid, and it was kind of tame as an adult.
Fair enough.
Desensitized by Stephen King stories.
Yeah, yeah. All right, what have you guys been up to for the last month and stuff you've watched? Because I know we were ending, your Halloween binges and coming in through some new releases and stuff.
I've been watching a whole bunch of new movies because I really only watched a couple new horror films in October, and I think I did watch The Haunted Mansion, but I don't think I considered it one of my horror movies. But the one with Lakeith Stanfield on Disney and Rosario Dawson,
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty good. I never saw the Eddie Murphy one, so I don't know what to compare it to, but it does. Yeah, it has like a Frighteners kind of feel. Um, it's a lot of fun. I'm a big fan of Lakeith Stanfield, so. Uh, and then I watched Killers of the Flower Moon, my first Scorsese film in the theater. It is a masterpiece. It is 3.5 hours, fly right by. Uh, and Leonardo DiCaprio, like one of his best performances. It's really good movie. I had my expectations managed for it, but honestly, I've seen so many new movies. Like I went and saw the Hunger Games the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes today. Why? Because I have a
Why?
girlfriend and she loves it. I like the Hunger Games movies too, but she loves them.
The trailer looked so bad. Like I'm just saying, like, because they showed the trailer before Exorcist and Saw 10, I was like, this trailer looks like complete and utter dog shit. It has nothing to do with like my feeling on Hunger Games. The trailer itself just looked like shit. Was it
Oh, it
like
was really good. I
decent at
mean, the
least?
trifecta of Peter Dinklage, Viola Davis, and Jason Schwartzman was enough to keep you entertained, and everyone else was fine and good in the movie. Um, yeah, it was pretty good. It's obviously PG-13, and they really, you know, they have violence, but it's very edited to not be gory at all. But effective all the same. It's a little bit long. Uh, the first 2 hours is like, yes, this is a really good movie. The last part of it, it's based on a book and it's like a story and it connects into the other movies. And I just kind of, watch them because I love the whole kids being, you know, killing each other. And it's cool to see kind of how the bare bones that the Hunger Games came from in the film. So, but my girlfriend loves those movies and she watches all of the shit with me, so I will no problem go to the movies and see that with her.
The movies were pretty good, but I mean, they were definitely pretty close to the book comparatively for YA adaptations. I mean, I like the books. Like I read the first one and I got so into them, I finished all three of them in like less than 2 days. So
Have you read the new one? That one?
I haven't read that one yet. Yeah, I mean, we when we moved to where I live now, we moved about 30 minutes further away from the bookstore I used to work at. So it's like an hour and 15 minute drive just to get there now. And
Uh,
yeah, so and not working there, I don't see all the new stuff coming out anymore. So unless something hits my radar,
Scoop
I
it on
just
Amazon or something. But yeah,
yeah,
but
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know if I would be like, I'm gonna get the book. Yeah. So yeah, uh, what was something else that I saw that was really good? I don't know. Have you guys seen any new movies? 2023?
Well, I'll go since I think you have probably a pretty big list, Kent. I finally saw The Nun and The Nun 2 for the first time. We watched them on Halloween. And like I say, they weren't bad. Especially the second one was pretty decent, but the first one was nowhere near as bad as what I was expecting, considering how much shit people talk about it.
Were they over reliant on jump scares? That was the thing I heard about the first Nun.
Yeah, it was definitely worse in the first one than it was in the second one, for sure.
Okay.
But I mean, I would, if we're talking the Conjuring universe, I would put both of them up over Annabelle Comes Home and Curse of La Llorona. Yeah,
Saw that one for the first time.
I mean, yeah, I was like, yeah.
It's okay. Well, Linda Cardellini.
Like I like Linda Cardellini, but that was not my favorite. It was kind of like a nothing movie. I finished Gen V, which I really liked. I've been caught up on Invincible season 2 so far, which is really good so far. Probably the best thing that I've watched, and I think episode 5 will come out in about 3 hours, is season 2 of 30 Coins on HBO. Like, if you guys haven't watched it, I would highly recommend it. Paul Giamatti is fucking great in this season too, so. But that's been about it.
All right. Yeah, my list is not very long because I hit a wall in October, and actually I hit a technical wall in October. So like, I wasn't watching as much new stuff because I just was not able to get posts made for whatever reason, and so I kind of just went back and watched comfort movies, I guess. So like I'd watched all the Final Destinations, for example. Not that they're great, not that they're bad. It's just some are better than others, of course. And I had my Brian Cox trilogy on Halloween night, which was nice. See Autopsy of Jane Doe, Trick or Treat, and The Ring. As far as anything kind of new, like I'd never seen Troll 2 until today, and for all the hype around it, it was fun. As I was telling Chris before the podcast, there's a song towards the end. It's the popcorn scene, where it is definitely like a take on Tom Jones' "You Can Take Your Hat Off," but without any lyrics, and it is delightful. And actually, if you look on YouTube and you type in Troll 2, The Witch of Popcorn, you'll get that song. So, highly recommend it. And the most recent movie is Five Nights at Freddy's. Finally watched it.
What was that?
What'd you think?
It's perfectly average. Like, Matthew Lillard's really good in it. Josh Hutcherson did good in it. One of my predictions did not hold up, unless it may hold up like in the sequel. I didn't play the games because, once again, I'm not big on jump scares, and I feel like that's all the fucking game was. So to go from a video game to a movie, they tried to give it substance, and from the stuff that I've watched on Game Theory, I remember him talking about it a lot. And actually, the host of Game Theory, Matt Pat, he actually has a small role in the movie, which was cool because I think he helped garner a ton of attention to that game series. I don't know. I definitely think there's going to be a sequel, but they need to up their game if they want to keep going. I don't know how much of an audience there's going to be, because are they even still making new games in that franchise?
I don't know either.
I've never played one.
I think I own like the first 4 or 5 on Steam, and I don't know. It's fun just going with lower expectations, and I think you can kind of have it as a popcorn movie, which is exactly what I did. I ate a bag of popcorn. You could do worse with your time. The song at the end is pretty fucking terrible. I'm sure like teenagers probably think it's good music, but it's total trash. Just trash. But otherwise, yeah, it was fine. and I watched Loki.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
And
Yeah, I did too.
I don't know, like I liked Loki. I unfortunately like, when I watched the first 5 episodes, it was before the 6th episode. I wish I would just waited a fucking week, just so I could have done all 6 together. Yeah, it was enjoy. Do you know if they're not planning on a third season? I'm guessing based on how it ended, right, Chris?
No, if nothing else, Tom Hiddleston said he wants a break for a bit, but he's willing to come back in the future. But like, I was reading an article the other day where they're like, he and Benedict Cumberbatch basically came on the scene at the same time, and Benedict's gone on and done a whole shitload of stuff, from Sherlock, Power of the Dog, the Marvel stuff, going out and been diverse, and Tom Hiddleston has basically done like this in The Night Manager in the same time period.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be good for Tom to get out. I mean, I really liked him as Loki. It's just, it's time. But I still enjoyed it. It's by far my favorite of the Disney Plus Marvel series.
Yeah, it was a nice kind of return to form after the last couple of things that have not been necessarily the greatest.
Like Secret Invasion.
Secret Invasion,
And She-Hulk.
apparently the Marvels, which I haven't seen yet.
I
haven't
actually saw Spider-Man: No Way Home for the first time. I think I'm caught up on everything except for the She-Hulk show I haven't seen, and so there's a second season of Loki you're talking about?
Yeah, season 2
Yes.
just finished up last week.
Yeah, I haven't seen that either. I liked the first season of Loki. It was all right, but that's when I started getting burnt out on Marvel because of the shows. Like Hawkeye was good, but
Yeah, I mean, my uncle was over for my son's birthday party the other day, and he was like, "So what do you think about the Marvels doing poorly?" And I was like, "Well, I think that the main number one thing is it's oversaturation. I mean, from Iron Man until Avengers Endgame, there were only ever 2 movies a year. And it showed. You had the one producer in charge of the overall thing being able to put all of his attention on each individual thing as it was coming out. And since Endgame to now, so 2019 to 2023, there have been 35 properties that Marvel has released.
Holy shit.
well, they did like all of those seasons
Wow.
in like 1 year, right? Like it was every time I watched WandaVision, and then
Yeah, so they've gone
Captain
from
America show would come out.
Yeah. They went from doing 2 movies a year to doing, I believe, 3 movies a year. And then for the first couple of years, they were doing 3 seasons of shows a year, and alternating with The Mandalorian. And since more Star Wars stuff has come off, they've slowed down the Marvel shows at the same time. But then we also had the Werewolf by Night and the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special and the short seasons of I Am Groot 1 and 2. So I mean, it's just been oversaturation. Like they beat DC in the first generation of stuff because they took their time and built everybody up, and then they stopped doing that and giving you a reason to care about the characters, and they just pushed and pushed and pushed. And I mean, that also goes along with probably a decline in writing quality and people overseeing it. Like one of the articles I saw brought up recently, when you were casting no-name people in the movies, like Robert Downey Jr. ended up getting, $75 million for Avengers Endgame, but when he started out, he was only asking like $1.5 million for Iron Man. So a greater portion of the budget was able to go into the actual movie. Versus, they're talking about casting Pedro Pascal as Reed Richards for the Fantastic Four movie that's supposed to come out in a couple of years. And, if he takes a quarter of the budget, with his asking price, how much movie does that leave you with? Especially with the amount of CGI that they have to put into comic book movies like that.
Well, they also have to kind of rush things out more and more because they want to tell the stories before the actors say, I'm done playing this role. Like they've had so many characters, and they kind of got to close out half of these stories before people are like, yeah.
I mean that's why like casting Pedro Pascal doesn't make any sense because he's already 48, almost 49. So if the first movie he's going to be in isn't going to come out for another 3 years, I mean that means he's 52 by the time the first ones come out. Where do you go from there? Like, if your first Fantastic Four movie, your dude's already in his 50s, like, are you going to have him already have the adult children that, are later story arcs from the comic book series?
Also, I mean, yes, Reed is important, but I wouldn't spend 10% of the budget on any one actor, considering you're going to have 4 main actors plus, I'm guessing, Doom.
Yeah,
maybe not. So, like, you have 5 main if you count Doom or whoever the main bad guy is. You can't give up 25% for one actor. That's terrible in my opinion.
I don't think it's enough to sell the movie either. I love Pedro Pascal.
Right, it's not a big enough.
Pedro Pascal, but it's not enough to, make me want to go.
And that was just an example. Like, I don't think he's got a $50 million asking price at this point. But that kind of
it's possible though. Like somebody could ask, and yeah, of course. I'm still annoyed. Like, why did we never get like a follow-up Hulk movie with Ruffalo? Like, I don't know. Everybody likes Ruffalo as Hulk, but we never kind of got.
At this point, part of it is he's in his 50s now, and he said, he doesn't want to be doing. He doesn't mind like doing like Professor Hulk because they CGI him and he doesn't have too much shit. But he's like, I don't want to be having to get into incredible shape when it's already this much harder now than it was 10, 15 years ago. And the other thing was, I think up until 2019, 2020, something like that, like who was it? Universal still owned the rights to Hulk, which is why they couldn't do the solo projects with him, which is but part of the reason why the one with Edward Norton just never ended up getting a sequel. They had issues with Norton, and then they had to share the rights, so they were like, well, we can't do a solo Hulk thing, but we can put him into Avengers and not have an issue with that.
And then they had the momentum.
Sense. Plus, that movie wasn't
and they had the
good.
momentum going of getting the Avengers together. And I think, with the whole Incredible Hulk with Ed Norton, which is actually a little bit, or was based on it to be a sequel off of Ang Lee's Hulk with Eric Bana, where the only thing that's consistent is where the Eric Bana Hulk ends. He's in South America, and then that's where it starts in the Incredible Hulk, and then that's
so. Like, one of the things I'm going to be really curious about, right, is in Thunderbolts, which is kind of like the Dark Avengers team, where they get like Yelena to be the new Black Widow, and the Garrett Russell, whatever, Wyatt Russell character who played in the new Captain America and Captain America or Falcon and Winter Soldier. They make like a dark version of the Avengers team. They're getting Harrison Ford to play William Hurt's part. But Harrison Ford's already in his 80s, and like, even if they CGI him like they did for the Indiana Jones 5, I don't see how he can run around really doing the Red Hulk version that he turns into.
Right.
sounds like a terrible, exactly what I was going to say. It sounds like a terrible idea. Like, leave Harrison Ford alone. He's not bringing in the numbers. I mean, he's not doing it as Indiana Jones, which was okay. I was hoping that movie would be a little bit better because James Mangold directed it, but and it was okay at best, but it felt like it was a sad note to end the legacy on.
I am I'm not a big fan of Phoebe Waller-Bridge, so I will give you my opinion next month probably, because it should be out on streaming by then.
Yeah, I noticed that it wasn't. It should be on streaming now. I think Blue Beetle is on Max now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Excited
think
to see that.
I want to say December 4th is the Indiana Jones
Yeah.
date. Well,
Is there any update on the Deadpool movie?
it's
Is
back
it
in production
coming
now.
out
Yeah,
next year?
it's coming
Finally?
out next year. I mean, that was definitely one of the ones that got pushed off because of the strike.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one I'm just looking forward to because I have to imagine is this officially Hugh Jackman's last time?
I don't know.
Or
The last one was supposedly officially Hugh Jackman's last time, so
I mean, he has to be getting paid a huge chunk of the budget, right, to bring him back.
I don't know about that big. I mean, he's a star, but he's not. I don't think he's like.
I think Ryan Reynolds like
Yeah,
relationship.
Ryan Reynolds is probably picking more. Yeah, but I mean that's probably the biggest thing. Like they fuck around all the time.
Do you think that they brought Hugh back just because they were unsatisfied with any possible replacements?
I think
No.
it potentially was because they want to be able to transition somebody from the old into the new.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, apparently Kelsey Grammer is in the after credits scene of the Marvels. Spoilers.
Beast
As
Nice.
Beast. Yeah.
Beast?
So I mean, they're definitely starting to bring the X-Men characters in, but like again, Kelsey Grammer is how fucking old, and like they supposedly they CGI'd him instead of doing like the prosthetic makeup like they did in X-Men 3.
Right.
So yeah, I will have to see. Like Disney's definitely having a rough year. Maybe they'll turn it around. Maybe they won't. I don't want to be one of those people who's like I want them to fail, but you know, I would appreciate an increase in quality. I think Loki season 2 gave us that.
Oh, that's
so.
cool.
I just liked Owen Wilson. Like, I don't ever like Owen Wilson. I don't hate him, but like, I don't know. That's my favorite role of Owen Wilson is just Mobius. I don't know
I loved Ke Kwan too.
what it is.
Like I'm so glad that he's starting on a comeback. You know, like I loved Everything Everywhere All at Once. That was one of my favorite movies of the last several years. And then seeing him just be like as likable as he was in Loki season 2 too. That was awesome.
He was Obi,
Yeah, Obi.
right? Yeah, he was great. I really enjoyed that. He actually makes me want to see everyone.
Dude, if you haven't seen it, I fucking loved it, man. It was so good.
I had two questions. Did you? I'm assuming Chris. Did you watch House of Fall of Usher?
Shit, I'm in the middle of the season. I haven't finished it yet.
How is it so far? Worth
Yeah,
it?
oh yeah. I don't know if I like it as much as Midnight Mass or The Haunting of Hill House, but I definitely like it more than Midnight Club, and probably more than most of Haunting of Bly Manor. Although I think the last two episodes of Bly Manor were really fucking good. It was just kind of a strain to get up there through them.
Gotcha. And my last question is, since we now haven't announced that we're getting a Legend of Zelda movie, I don't know, Kevin, if you've even played any of the Legend of Zeldas, but do you have any preference for which game it should be based off of?
Well, no, I wouldn't. I only remember the original game and then the Nintendo 64 game.
Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask?
With that one is like considered one of the greatest games of all time. Yeah, and so
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, I would probably want the original story because that's what.
The original story is really good, but I've seen it already done on Legend of Neil to an extent.
I don't know that.
Hey, if you've never seen Legend of Neil, people, go on fucking YouTube. You owe it to yourself. It's one of the funniest fucking things out there. If you're into Legend of Zelda, it's fucking
What's
great
the chain?
time.
Well, it's somewhere between your asshole and your testicle.
Sounds awesome.
Dude, it's
The
fucking great.
fairy.
I just want it to be
Oh my-
good.
yeah,
If they're
yeah.
going to do a Legend of Zelda movie, is it going to be live action? Hoping so.
I feel like that's what I heard, but I don't know. Maybe they may change their mind. I would prefer it not to be live action. I'd rather it be more like what we got with Mario. It doesn't have to be so
Yeah, Mario
bright,
was good,
sunshiny,
actually.
happy, but
Surprisingly, in a way.
I am kind of disturbed that so many people look down on animation as a viable form of entertainment because I think so many things would get made easier if they would just animate them.
agreed. I think Metroid would be better animated. That's something I would actually like to see. See, I wanted Zelda and Metroid to be more like on an HBO to get like an 8 or 10 episode story than trying to fit too much into like Mario. You can fit into a movie because he doesn't have like a lot of his games aren't these epic quests. But Metroid and Zelda, like these are epic quests. Or fucking God of War. They're going to try to do God of War, I believe. I don't think you can do God of War justice in a 2-hour movie. Just my
Yeah, I
opinion.
would agree.
Series.
Yeah, I'd rather see. I mean, and series seem to be profitable if you do it well enough. Like The Last of Us killed it,
Yeah,
as far
I
as
think
I
so.
know.
Yeah, yeah. It was really good. So, I mean, that's literally what you got to do. You got to spring quality.
Yeah, I'd rather get 1 or 2 great shows a month than to have just oversaturation of stuff that I'm like, maybe I'll watch it someday and never get around to it. So, I have one last question just because I was wondering, Kevin, did you
Have
watch
not gotten around to that.
Talk to Me?
It's not on. It's not on anything. I didn't see it in the theater. I don't
Okay.
think it's on. Yeah, that would. It's
It's not
A24, so I
streaming anywhere
imagine it
yet.
would be on Showtime, Paramount, and I haven't seen it.
Yeah. Yep. I'm waiting for that and Maxine. So, all right, I'll shut up.
All right, guys. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope we definitively answered all the questions you had over this podcast topic. Next month is going to be I guess it's probably become our tradition now at this point, Kent, huh? Where we take a step back from horror and we do a kind of happy, fun topic to cleanse the palate before the new year. So, you want to announce what we're going to be doing, Kent?
We are going to do a musical, our top 5 favorite musicals, and I fully. You know what? I'm just going to say it right now. We're going to exclude Rocky Horror because we all love Rocky Horror and we can all definitively agree it's probably on all of our
God
lists.
damn it,
I'm
Kent.
guessing. Yeah, I'm just because I was going to have it, you were going to have it. I don't know. Kevin probably was going to have fucking Possession the musical,
Cannibal,
like
the
some
musical.
weird shit. But
Yeah, Trauma. Yeah, oh yeah, I owned it.
have you ever
I love
seen
it.
that? Because it's
probably
great.
would be on my list. Yeah, Rocky Horror I wouldn't put on my list. You can have
Damn it, Kevin, that's on
I have
my
to do like a
list.
touch base with Chris too. Like, you like, did you like the Rent movie or what? Was it good? You did.
I did. I did. It
Top
wasn't.
5?
It wasn't bad. I don't know. I mean, I know what my number
We'll
one
save
is.
all that for next time. I think that's a good cliffhanger. But yeah, but I know that like me and Chris at least
Fuck
in
yeah.
high school had a lot of the same favorites. I would say.
Well, what I find funny is my parents and my wife's parents are all relatively the same age. I think there's a 3-year span between like all 4 of them. And my wife grew up like on the musicals that were probably about 15 to 20 years older than the ones that I grew up on because my parents were like listening to the stuff from the 70s and the 80s and her parents were listening to like Rodgers and Hammerstein from like the 50s and the 60s. So it's interesting to see, like the kind of stuff that she, especially at Christmas time, the stuff that she watches versus the stuff that I
Musical
watch.
form.
Well, in musical form, but also just in general music. Like It's a Wonderful Life was always the biggest one, and then Christmas Story were always the biggest ones for me, and for her it was like
Oh yeah.
White Christmas and shit, I don't even Miracle on
Yeah,
34th
they were
Street
kind of
and
the
stuff like
boring
that.
ones, especially the black and white Miracle on 34th Street. I'm having trouble just saying the title.
I
All
know.
right.
Anyways, guys, again, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next month. Take care.
Have a good night, guys.